Welcome to this Modern Studies Dissertation Surgery, created by a team of criminologists across Scottish universities, all part of the SCCJR, the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research. In this session, we will cover identifying your dissertation topic, methods and ethics, literature review, analyzing, reporting, and discussing your data. We will give you some practical tips on writing your dissertation and searching for literature. If you are interested in finding more specific resources relating to different criminological topics, make sure you visit the SCCJR website to find all these resources available for you. We really hope that you enjoyed this session and find it useful for your advanced higher modern studies dissertation. Welcome to this learning resource on identifying the topic. In this section, we will lead you through the process of identifying a broad area of research, narrowing down your research question or hypothesis, and making your arguments clear. Writing any research project, whether it is your dissertation or essays you will write at university, begins with identifying the topic of your research. Your teacher will provide you with a list of suggested topics for your advanced higher dissertation. However, identifying the topic is more than just deciding which broad area of criminological research you are interested in. Here, we will lead you through the process of identifying the topic, narrowing it down and choosing your hypothesis to ensure that your research project remains focused on what you want it to achieve. The first step is identifying a broad area of research. This is the easiest step. Let's say you are really interested in a broad area of policing research, specifically in exploring the relationship between the police and the public in Scotland. This is a very broad area, but also one that has already been well researched, meaning that you will be able to identify relevant sources that support your hypothesis easily. However, you would not be able to research this for your dissertation. There are simply too many aspects of police-public relationships to explore. However, a good starting point for your dissertation is deciding what area you are interested in. It is easier to conduct your research and write your dissertation if you're exploring something you have a genuine interest in. The second step is narrowing down your research question or hypothesis. Now that you have found what area of research you are interested in, it's time to narrow it down into a research question or a hypothesis. Don't worry if you're not sure what the difference between the two is just yet. Hopefully, it will become clear as we go through this resource. In general, hypothesis and research questions are very similar, and that's why many students struggle with differentiating between the two, and the circumstances when they should use either a research question or a hypothesis. Deciding a research question or hypothesis is equally important for both qualitative and quantitative methods. So let's break down the difference between the research question and a hypothesis first. In general, a research question is a specific question that your study is designed to answer and around which the research is designed and conducted. It should be focused and specific, and research methods should be chosen in a way that allows for this question to be answered. One example of a research question would be, what do ethnic minorities in Glasgow think about the use of stop and search? On the other hand, hypothesis is a prediction or explanation of a phenomenon that can be tested through scientific research. Generally, it is an educated guess based on previous knowledge and observations. It guides the research process to help researchers design a study that tests the validity of the hypothesis. An example of a hypothesis would be ethnic minority groups' negative experiences with stop and search negatively impact on their opinions of local police. As you can see, a research question is more open-ended. In research guided by research questions, you don't know what you are going to find, and your aim is to generally conduct an exploratory study that will provide an answer to your question. This answer does not need to be conclusive. When coming across various research papers, you will realize that many of them have very inconclusive findings. For example, if research might conclude with different ways in which ethnic minorities think of stop and search. Not having a definite conclusion to your research isn't a bad thing, especially when your sample is relatively small. You are very likely to encounter a lot of differing experiences and opinions. You can always acknowledge this as a limitation and propose further research that can address those. In fact, because research questions are relatively open-ended, they are very likely to produce a lot of varying results. You will often find research questions in qualitative research designs. In contrast, the point of a hypothesis is to test a prediction. Often, hypothesis appears in quantitative and experimental research designs, where you will see researchers conducting experiments to test their hypothesis using particular methods. However, hypotheses can also be tested using qualitative methods. And when you're conducting your advanced higher dissertation, this is what you will be asked to do, regardless of your chosen research method. For example, you might find a research paper that concludes that experience of stop and search decreases people's trust in the police. For your own dissertation, you might want to test this hypothesis in your local area. This can be done qualitatively, for example using interviews or focus groups, or quantitatively, for example using a survey. Refer to our Analyzing, Reporting, and Discussing Your Data resource to see how you would conduct qualitative and quantitative research. Now that you know the difference between the research question and a hypothesis, how do you narrow your topic down and formulate the correct hypothesis? The process generally is quite iterative, meaning that you will need to go back and forth between different stages. In general, however, the starting point should be conducting a literature review. You can refer to our Writing a Literature Review resource for detailed guidance on the process. To narrow down your topic and formulate hypotheses, you need to know what other research has been done, what questions they asked, what methods they used, and what conclusions they presented. Therefore, you need to familiarize yourself with a broad area of your research, for example, police public relations. From there, you might become inclined to follow a more specific direction, focusing on a specific area of policing, such as stop and search. You will generally end up following a thread of various research, approaching different methods and findings that will help you define your hypothesis. It will look different depending on the topic, and sometimes you might come up with a hypothesis at the beginning. However, it is important not to skip scoping of previous literature when narrowing down your topic. It will help you ensure that there are sufficient resources available to support your argument when conducting your research. The reverse triangle that you can see provides an example of how you can approach literature search to narrow down the topic of your dissertation, at the same time making your hypothesis clear. You will come across it again when we talk about writing literature review. From the small triangle on the bottom, you will be able to formulate the hypothesis which your dissertation will test. For example, ethnic minorities' experience of stop and search influences their trust in the police. Your dissertation will either agree or disagree with the statement and demonstrate the ways in which experience of stop and search influences ethnic minorities' trust in the police. The last step is making your arguments clear. Now that you have your hypothesis and you have done your initial literature search in preparation for literature review, you should be able to begin your research. The last thing to keep in mind for the rest of the process is ensuring that you make your arguments clear throughout your dissertation. Think of your hypothesis as a guiding light leading you through your dissertation. The point of your research is to provide evidence for or against this hypothesis. Any arguments made throughout your dissertation need to contribute to that answer. It's easy to go off on a tangent when you're doing research, especially with so many theories, prior research, and sources you are likely to come across. Don't get discouraged and don't worry if that happens. The easiest way to stay on track with answering your hypothesis is to keep going back to it when introducing new information to ensure that everything you include in your dissertation is relevant. This is particularly important with smaller word count, such as 5,000 words for your advanced higher dissertation. You want to be especially selective with what you include to ensure that the information isn't unnecessarily distracting from the key argument presented throughout your dissertation. If you have followed these steps, you should be able to move from broad area of interest into a narrow and specific hypothesis and the topic that your dissertation will cover. And just to summarize what we talked about in this resource, here are some key takeaways. There is a difference between a research question and a hypothesis. Make sure to check with your teacher which one is required for your dissertation and formulate it accordingly. Your hypothesis won't exist in a vacuum. Conduct initial scoping of literature to familiarize yourself with your area of interest in order to narrow down your research topic and formulate your hypothesis. Stay on track. Your hypothesis will guide you through your research, but you need to ensure that all new arguments and information that is introduced in your dissertation is relevant and helps you provide evidence for or against your hypothesis. You can now move on to writing your literature review, gathering your data, and conducting your analysis. Good luck!